Okay. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Everybody else? Yeah, there we go. All right.
Yes.
I see people I know.
Yeah, the stop and restart function actually worked. All right. So while we are waiting for folks to come on, I'll give them just another minute. We had some fun polling questions. We thought we'd keep people occupied while we're waiting for folks to get on. So if you've never seen the polling function happen before, you're going to see a question pop up on your screen, and you can click either it'll say multiple choice or one answer only. So the first question is going to be, what are your two favorite ways to be a part of Trinity? What are your two favorite ways to be a part of Trinity? So go ahead and click 2, no more than 2, and then we'll see what we get. Polling. All right. Looks like worship wins. Can you all see that one? Can you see those stats? Does that pop up on your screen?
No.
No.
Okay. Oh, here
I
we
believe
go.
you.
There
There it is.
There we go.
So worship, everybody said worship, which that's encouraging to hear as a priest. And then, not surprisingly, those who have shown up to a small group ministry event have chosen their ministry group activities. So I'm glad that you believe in the work that you have shown up here for. All right, next question.
100%. Isn't that great?
Let's see. Okay, here we go. Next question. All right. So how did you find your way to Trinity? And if your answer's not up here, you can always put it in the chat.
Oops.
My wife made me is not on the list.
I should have put that one on there, Paul. I didn't think of it. All right. Almost there. More people. Oh, gay pride booth. Should have put that one on there too, Dan. See, didn't think of it.
The 1% who good attractive.
Probably more like 10%. Yeah, that's what the statistics say.
And Dan, I'm really glad to hear that.
All right, so our results are, well, we've got a lot of no newbies here from online worship, but people looking for a church. And you found Trinity. I'm glad you're here. Oh, we got something from Scott too. What's the addition here, Scott?
Just that I was specifically looking for the Episcopal Church.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. All right. This one's just a fun one. Would you rather speak all languages or speak animals?
How did you add the name? They didn't finish it.
What? What is this question?
Closed out.
Funny question. If you had to pick, would you rather be able to speak all languages or would you like to be able to speak to animals?
Animals.
Oh, we're pretty much half and half here. Animal lovers versus people lovers.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know who's gonna win.
Participants.
All right, everybody voted. And And the poll is just slightly in favor of take me back in time before the Tower of Babel, getting to communicate with one another. But animals are a close second. All right, last question, and this one will lead us into the content for the day. If you could grow only one aspect of your group, which would it be? Would you want more volunteers? Would you want a more focused mission? Would you want more leadership? Or more room for children and youth? Or just some more food?
It's Episcopal, more food.
More diversity is something that Scott says we could also have added.
Hello. Did we put on the Jeopardy music?
Yeah, I should have. Huh? We've got a second vote for Scott's addition of more diversity. I imagine if I put that on there, that one went a 1.
Yeah.
Next time I'll ask Scott for his input on the poll questions. I'm glad our communications person thought of it. All right, here are the results of that poll. More volunteers. And then the next up is more leadership opportunities for those groups and a more focused mission. And with that, did you all get to see that? Oh, okay. And with that, I would love to introduce our speakers who are here to help us with just that work. We have with us the Reverend Brad Purdom, canon for congregations in the Diocese of Ohio, and Kirsten Frei-Herrmann, program director for Greater Cleveland Volunteers. So we're so grateful that you're here with us, and who you have on the screen are leaders and members of Trinity Cathedral who are here to grow their groups. I want to give everyone just a heads up on the format for tonight, which is going to be the first 20 or so minutes. We will hear from Kirsten, and she'll share her presentation on her experience at Greater Cleveland Volunteers and give us insight into volunteerism from that perspective. And then Brad will follow up with some insight from a church perspective and help us to grow our groups with spirituality in mind and relationship building in mind. So I thank you both. And if I'll be moderating and sharing the screen and such, so if you want to share your screen, you can. If you have something you want me to share, you can just let me know and send me info in the chat. So this informational session is being recorded. There are people who wanted to be here tonight that couldn't make the meeting, so the group is even bigger than what we have here. And I'm so grateful to all of you who were able to make time in your schedule to be here tonight. I'm going to invite Kirsten to take center stage.
Well, thank you everybody for having me. I'm going to start hopefully by sharing my screen. This is always the part of the Zoom meeting that you're always a little nervous about, to be sure that it actually will work.
My screen's telling me you're allowed to, so hopefully.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Can everybody see my screen? Yes? Okay. No, you cannot.
No.
Okay. Hold on. Here we go. Now can you see it?
Yes.
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 Okay. Wonderful. So that part worked. So nope. Okay, there we go. So I wanted to start, first of all, thank you for having me be here so I can share a little bit about the building blocks of a stellar volunteer program. And I know you are all here, right? Because you want to build the different ministries that you are kind of in charge of. And because I'm sharing my screen, it's hard for me to see the chat. So Adrian, if you wouldn't mind, if there's questions that come up, if you could kind of just, stop me, and I will be happy to address those either throughout the presentation, or I know we are also leaving time at the end to kind of talk about, have some Q&A period at the end as well. So to start with, let me introduce myself. As Adrian said, I am Kirsten Frei-Herrmann. I am the program director with Greater Cleveland Volunteers. I have been in my position, I've been with the agency, oh boy, I think it's going on 17 years now. So it's been a while. And so what I would love to hear from all of you is, now whether you want to unmute yourself and share it or put it into the chat, that's fine, is what do you hope to gain from tonight's session? So as a ministry leader, what is something that you hope to gain from the session tonight?
This is Bill Fuller speaking. I think for me, it would be a sense of what's the volunteer world like in 2021? And, it's very different from 10 years ago, and how, in the various groups that we're a part of, how do we key in to what people are willing and ready to do in 2021?
Great question, Bill. And if I forget to answer that throughout the presentation, we can definitely hit that during the Q&A. And you are right, volunteerism looks very different today than it did 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and even 10 years ago. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay.
In the chat, we do have a couple in the chat. One is the means of retaining volunteers, and the second is the profile of today's volunteers.
Okay, wonderful.
A third, to learn how to attract more participants.
Okay, and hopefully some of the nuggets I'm going to give you tonight will give you at least an inkling of some new information that will help you with that. Okay, so just real quickly, volunteerism facts. So United States has a long history of volunteerism. It's something very unique to kind of our society and culture, and dating back to all the way to 1736, when the first volunteer firehouse was established by none other than Benjamin Franklin. So that is a little piece of history that some people don't know. In Ohio, there are about 3 million volunteers, which makes up about 33% of the population. And they give just under 300 million hours of service to different agencies that they're part of. Now, a lot of this is formal volunteering. So that's when you're volunteering through an organization, an agency, you're tracking hours. And so, sometimes volunteering in a faith-based organization, a house of worship, sometimes that's kind of that gray area, right? Am I doing informal because you're part of a ministry and you're not necessarily tracking all the hours that you're putting into it? So let's delve into the first building block of volunteerism, and that's how to prepare for the volunteers that you're going to be bringing in. So it's building an infrastructure. And so one of the first things we tell people in ministry leadership roles, or even in volunteer programs and organizations, is to really look at having a position description for every volunteer position that you are trying to fill in your ministry. So to really think through some of the things that are listed here on this slide. You also want to be looking at an onboarding process. So if you're bringing volunteers into the group that you are in charge of, what kind of onboarding are they going to need, or would they want to feel comfortable assisting in that ministry? So for things to consider, we talk about things like, are there qualifications that you are looking for in volunteers, right? What kind of person are you looking for? Do they have to have a particular kind of skill? One of the other things that we tell people is really look at what kind of risk management, or in layman's term, are you going to have to do a background check for them, right? Because Ohio law says that if a volunteer is volunteering unsupervised with children, with the elderly, or with someone who's disabled, they really should have a background check. So that's something you want to kind of look into as well. The other thing we ask people to think about as you're trying to bring volunteers in, what kind of commitment are you asking for them? And commitment, I'm talking about not only kind of schedule, right? Are you asking them to come in once a week, a couple times a month, on a monthly basis, but then also how long? Are you asking them to commit to 6 months, 12 months, that type of thing? And kind of going back to your question, Bill, before is that the trends in volunteerism are showing that the longer the commitment, the more difficult it is to find people. And so you may have already found that, right, for the different roles that you're trying to fill within your different ministry groups, that really people are now starting to lean toward project-based, short-term, flexible schedules, right? Just like as an employee, that's one of the things too. We like flexibility now. And I think that the pandemic has even brought that more to kind of the forefront. You also want to look at what kind of orientation is that volunteer going to need? Are they going to need any particular training to do whatever role that you're asking them to do within your ministry? How are they going to be supervised, and by whom? And then also benefits. Now, when we talk about benefits, we think about what is the volunteer going to get out of assisting in your ministry? And I know, Adrian, at the beginning, you talked about one of the perks, right? What do you want more of? Food was not one of them, right? But for a lot of volunteers, they want to know, right? Am I going to get free coffee? Am I going to get fed? Free food? Those are all considered benefits. And it could even be, now another benefit is the networking, the friendships that are formed. And so each volunteer is different. So you have to kind of think through these things, because what might speak to one person may not speak to the other person. And that's why recruiting volunteers can be such challenging work, because not everybody's going to want the same thing, right? Not everybody's going to be attracted to the same kind of recruitment message. And then finally, the other thing that we like to talk about a little bit is budgetary considerations. So you might be like, well, what kind of budget? So like, for an example, if you're going to be doing background checks, that's going to cost some money, right? If they're going to need any particular supplies, that might cost some money. So it's kind of, those are all kind of things you have to kind of consider. So for your ministry, if you're coming together, figuring out how much money you may need, or how much money having volunteers within the cathedral, those are all just things you have to kind of think through. So that's the first building block. I see the number of chat messages has gone up. So is there anything, Adrian, that I need to address at this point?
I think one of the questions that's would be relevant for both you and Brad is how do we regain volunteers lost to COVID? Are there any strategies or any people that are thinking about this unique experience we've all shared that has made people really reevaluate, you know, the kinds of priorities they have or the kinds of time commitments that they have.
And that is the $1 million question, right? If we knew the answer to that, we'd be good as gold, because we'd find a way to bring these people back. And we're finding the same thing at our organization, that there are volunteers who have chosen to kind of step away from volunteering. Now, does that mean they're going to step away forever? Not necessarily. So I think one of the things too is to continue to have those volunteers kind of in your communication, to keep tabs with them. So you're not like, oh, they're not ready to come back, I'm just going to write them off and I'm not going to communicate with them anymore. To kind of still keep them in the loop, because maybe they will come back, and maybe you could do a little bit more delving to figure out, why are they choosing not to come back? Is it because they're not passionate about what you're doing in your ministry group anymore? Possibly. Is it that they found something else to occupy their time? And that's what we've kind of have found too, that, you know, some of those people will not come back to our program, but we need to figure out a way to rebuild and bring more people in, or new people in, new recruitment avenues. It could also be that there are just some people who aren't feeling real safe about returning to a face-to-face, in-person situation. So maybe to think about, are there things that I could be doing to help them feel safer? Or are there things that they could be doing from home for me in the meantime? You know, so maybe there's some things that to really rethink, well, whatever that volunteer position is, could that somehow be changed in a way so that way we can continue to engage those people? So all valid and really important points. Okay, so once you kind of have these things in place to kind of figure out, okay, who am I looking for? What kind of qualifications, what kind of commitment do I want from them? Or am I asking of them? The next thing is always, next question is, how are you going to find these people, right? So 3 main things that we're going to delve into a little bit about. One is, where can you go to find new volunteers? What methods can you use to find them? And then when is the best time to find them? So let's start with where. So I think in volunteer recruitment, there's basically 2 general strategies. One is, am I doing a general ask? Meaning we're going to put an ask out that, hey, do you want to volunteer with this ministry or with the cathedral? Or is it a specific that you have a particular volunteer role that you are trying to fill within your ministry? Then once you kind of figure out which strategy you're going to work on, then that kind of works into the where. So I think one of the things is, are there additional things that can be done for you to find volunteers within the cathedral or within the diocese? If you feel, you know, that you've exhausted all these different things within that, then it's time to look outside the cathedral. And so that's kind of where you want to look at, where can I go, or what can I do to find the people that would be ideal for the people that I'm trying to bring into my ministry. So forming community partnership is one thing, right? So if you're looking for people who are close to the cathedral, right? Have you formed a partnership, or can you look at forming a partnership with Cleveland State or some of the community organizations or the housing that is surrounding the cathedral? And then that kind of boils then into the method. How am I going to try to find them? Does that mean we're going to try to do online, right? Whether that be social media, whether that be a variety of different websites. But the number one way to find volunteers continues to be word of mouth. So it is friends telling friends about their volunteer experience. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit, about retention, right? How important it is to show volunteers that they are appreciated, because that's going to help with retention. For some places, you know, another method, depending on if it's a particular volunteer role that you're trying to fill, like for an example, I know, right, the cathedral does something with tutoring, I think at Marion Sterling, correct? So for that, if it is not an age dependent role, you might also look for those types of opportunities. You know, can you partner with the college for education majors or places like that? And I think the other thing is, age-wise, there is a difference on how demographically you can go and recruit people. For an example, the younger volunteer tends to be more digital, online driven, right? Social media, online websites, things like that. The older volunteer still tends to like print. So newsletter, things like that. We recently, just this summer, we did a direct mail. We did mailed postcards out to people, and we had a huge response. We had like 60 inquiries from a postcard mailing, which for us was a big response. And that we hadn't done that since before the pandemic. So you have to kind of look at too, of what type of volunteer you're looking for. And if you were that person, like to almost put an idea of this is my ideal volunteer. If I were that potential person, how would I most likely want to hear about it? And then the final thing in this is kind of when, meaning timing. So if you as a ministry leader know that you need to have volunteers in place, let's say by August or September, you're probably going to want to do a majority of your recruiting over the summer months. Or if you just have a lot of other responsibilities and you're like, there is no way I'm going to be able to do this during the summer months because everybody's on vacation, then you have to kind of adjust your volunteer recruitment to be at other times of the year as well. So that's kind of just a little bit about the timing of it as well. And like for us too, we have found that trying to recruit volunteers in November and December is very challenging, because most people, they're already thinking about the holidays, right? Am I going to get together with family? They're planning for their holiday things, and they're not necessarily thinking about, I want to volunteer and get more involved with my community during that time of the year. Unless the one caveat or exception I would say that is if you have a program where you are feeding the hungry, like on Thanksgiving or Christmas, things like that, those are things that people want to give back to around the holidays. But then what we have found is people who do that tend to not want to volunteer during the other parts of the year. So there tends to be not a lot of, from our experience, not a lot of crossover for people who volunteer during the holidays. Okay, so that's a little bit about recruitment. Let's talk about, now you have all these new people who want to help in your ministry, right? You've put everything in place, you've recruited them, and now how are you going to bring them on? So a couple things. One is we talk about is you want to figure out what do I as a ministry leader need to train them on? So what do they need to know? And what would be helpful for them to know for the role that they are going to be doing within your ministry? Next thing we kind of talk about is what kind of forms or documentation will you want from them? So for an example, if you are working with volunteers in your ministry, and what happens if that volunteer becomes unresponsive? Do you have an emergency contact for that volunteer? So if something happens, who are you going to reach out to? The other thing is to look at, are you requiring some kind of confidentiality statement? Maybe they're interacting with people that, is of a sensitive nature. You may want to have them fill out some kind of confidentiality statement. So those are all kind of forms to think through, or what are the things that I would want to have in place for them. And again, that confidentiality statement, right, also feeds into training, that you want to train them the importance of keeping things confidential. And then along that, we also talk about record keeping. So depending on what they are doing in their volunteer role, are they going to have to do any kind of documentation or record keeping for that? And that could be as basic as you're tracking the number of hours that they're volunteering, but it also could be, right, if they're tutoring, are they having to fill out what they worked on with a student every single time? So those are all kind of things that fall into record keeping. And then the final thing that I want to just kind of mention is, do you have a opportunity, are you giving the individuals an opportunity to provide feedback to you or suggestions on how to improve the ministry group that you're part of? How can the volunteer experience be improved? So just kind of building that in as well. Okay, so let's talk about appreciation. So if and when volunteers feel appreciated, more likely that's going to turn into retention. You're going to be able to retain them. And then if you're able to retain them, that's less new people you have to bring on, right? New people that you have to onboard and train. So volunteers can feel appreciated in a variety of different ways. It could be as simple as just saying, writing a thank you card to them for that, that you are noticing the work that they're putting in, that you appreciate them. It could be as simple as, occasionally bringing in, if they're coming in on a regular basis, bringing in donuts every once in a while for them and coffee and so forth. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is volunteers like to know that they're making an impact, that they are appreciated, and that the work that they are doing in the ministry is having an impact on the ministry and the bigger scheme of the cathedral. So those are all kind of things that you can kind of keep in mind for that. So the next couple of slides I just have a little bit of information about Greater Cleveland Volunteers. If this is not something, if it's an organization you are not familiar with, we do provide volunteers to more than 100 different nonprofits in the county. And we actually, because of the pandemic, we actually started a brand new program called Chat Pals, which is building connection through friendly calls. So where we match participants who are over the age of 55 with a friendly caller to help them stay connected in the community and hopefully make a new friend. So we started this program because we saw the need that, many older adults were very isolated during the pandemic, weren't able to get out, lost kind of their social connection. So this is a new program that we started. On this next slide, I have some resources. These are resources that are geared toward someone in the field of volunteer management, but there might be information in these resources that would also be applicable to you and what you're doing at the cathedral in your different ministries. So finally, I just want to provide you with my contact information. My phone number is there. I am here to help you in any way I can. If you have questions, If you want to learn more about what we do, or if you have someone that you think would benefit from being a participant in the Chat Pals program, please, feel free to reach out to me. But I am more than happy to, help answer any questions that might have come up during the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that way I can answer any questions and I can see the chat in case there was anything else that came up.
So if there are any specific questions related to Kirsten's presentation that you have a gap or a hole that you need answered at this moment, I think that would be a fine time to ask those questions. And then we'll hold any sort of bigger, deeper conversation questions for after we hear from Brad, because he may touch on some of the questions that you have.
Kirsten, it's Barbara Krause here. And I have a question about your postcard recruitment that you did. Who is your target audience on that?
So that particular one, we targeted people, I think between the age of like 55 to about 70 in the neighborhoods surrounding the schools where we run our tutoring program. So we picked a couple different zip codes. We bought a mailing list from that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yep. But just also, so if you go to the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, voting records are public. And so you could also use that information if you wanted to do a targeted mailing. I don't know if you were aware of that. I see Catherine is nodding her head up and down. So, and that is free of charge. So then you don't have to purchase a mailing list.
Right. Okay. So you were going after new people there. You were just going to previous volunteers.
Correct.
Okay.
Now we have done a little bit more of mailing to what we would call previous volunteers. We're not really calling them previous, but they're volunteers who have not been active since the beginning of 2020, right? So they are still active in our system, but they have not had any hours of service with us. So we've done mailings with them as well, email blasts, even reaching out to them via phone. Now, the other thing we've done it twice now during the course of the pandemic. We sent out like a survey to volunteers just to kind of figure out like their comfort level with returning to service. So about a year ago, before the vaccine was even available, we wanted to find out, were you planning on returning to service? If you're not comfortable, what would make you comfortable? So at least we could kind of get some feedback from that. And then we kind of did another follow-up survey this summer to see if some of their thinking had changed a little bit.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Kristen. Could you then tell us if their feelings had changed? I'd be interested in that as well.
So it's interesting. So, pre-vaccine being available, most people were like, I'll be comfortable once the vaccine's available. So then we started hearing from volunteers, and again, most of our volunteers are over the age of 55. We started hearing from them again, I would say like last May, after the vaccine was available, a lot of people had gotten vaccinated, and then they were starting ready to come back, and then Delta shot up. And then everybody was like, nope, changed my mind. I'm not ready to come back yet. And now what we're starting to see, I'd say just in the last month, we're starting to see a little bit of that activity, that desire to volunteer again, come up again. People have had their boosters. I think, for a lot of people, we've now figured out how to live kind of go through, get back to some of our normal activities. So we're starting to see a little bit now that the volunteers are starting to feel like, okay, I'm ready to volunteer again. Not everybody, but some.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm going to invite Brad to go ahead and take the steering wheel, and feel free to share your screen and take us to the next section.
There I am. Okay. Can you see my screen or no?
We can see it. It shows here. It's not in like a viewing.
Okay.
But yeah, we can see it.
How's that?
There you go.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Kirsten. That's a great deal of great information. And of course, volunteers are volunteers, and working with people is working with people. And so there is indeed a great deal that moves back and forth, and certainly everything that Kirsten was sharing with us does. So that's great. I want to start with, and I'm going to sort of tip my hat to the rest of everything that I'm going to say here, like right off the bat. And that is to say that the purpose, or not the purpose, but the primary difference between what secular volunteerism and church volunteerism, faith-based volunteerism, is, of course, the core purpose and what it is that we're trying to do. And a lot of times, we think that it's easy for us to sort of think and fall into a pattern of saying that, the most important thing that we're doing is the task to which we are assigned, or that which we're trying to accomplish. And I want to argue that it is, at least there are some other things that are at least as important within the area of the faith-based world. And so I'm going to start with this very, very quickly. And this, of course, is stuff that we could spend all the rest of our time and a great deal more on, but we won't. What is the mission of our church, of the church writ large? And in our prayer book, it says the mission of the church is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. So super, super quick here, we are going to dance through the entire Bible in about 60 seconds. So we'll start, the scripture begins with the creation stories. And I want to point out particularly the second creation story, in which we really open up, not the sort of cosmic stuff in the first one, but the really interrelationship and the intimacy. This is a beautifully, beautifully intimate story. I mean, if you think about God scooping the mud of the riverbank and, blowing life, kissing life into the human, it's a beautiful and very intimate story. And of course, the point of that story, or the end of that story, I should say, is brokenness, brokenness of relationship. And in the Genesis story, in the garden story, it begins with God, humanity, and all of creation, each in perfect relationship one with another. And the story is that that's not the way we live now. And so how did that happen? And that's what that garden story is about. So if you jump all the way from there to the very end of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, in a passage that we normally hear primarily at funerals, there is this beautiful another image, a beautiful image of the heavenly city of Jerusalem descending and becoming one with, uniting with creation. And in that creation, and then, all peoples will be together, the peoples will flock, and it, just goes and goes. But the point of that is that perfection of relationship between God, humanity, and creation is restored. And so what you have is there's this overarching narrative to the scripture. You have we are in perfect relationship with God, each other, and creation at the beginning. We fall out of it, and ultimately we are restored to that perfect kind of perfection of relationship, again, between God, all of humanity, and creation. Everything else in the Bible is the story of God working in the world to bring that around, to bring that about. And so if you look at what our prayer book says the mission of the church is here, it is to restore. It says exactly that God's mission in the world is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. That's what God is doing throughout the scripture, and that's what God ultimately, what is fulfilled ultimately in the end. And because that is God's mission, then the mission of the church is to work alongside God in that work, which is, again, restoring all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. So God's mission is a mission of reconciliation and restoration, and bringing the realm of God, or the fullness of relationship, back to the intended, God's intended way for that. And because that's God's mission in the world, as I said, it is also the church's mission. If people are fond of using one version or another of this little saying here, but it is to say that God's church doesn't have a mission, but God's mission has a church. So God's purpose is this work of reconciliation and restoration, and so is ours. And our work then is to learn, gain the eyes to see and know where God is already at work in the world and among us, and to join God in that work, to support God in that work. And once again, of reconciliation and restoration, of building relationship. And that's really my ultimate point here. So the question then becomes, well, how does that mission inform what we think about small groups, volunteers, that sort of thing in the church? And how does it differ from, the same thing in other organizations? And the answer is that in the church, all of this kind of work, be it volunteer work or small, or sort of more formation-based small group work, all of this work is to further the mission of God in the world. And so I would argue 100%, but I'll give myself a little leeway on it and say 95% of the work that we do in the church, the quality of relationships that we offer and build, the type and quality of relationships between each other and between us and the people with whom we work, in volunteers and others, that the relationship is the first and most important thing, even more important than the task itself in some ways. And I don't want to overstate that. Obviously, if we're feeding or we're doing this or we're doing that's very, very important. But it is important to do with this in mind. One of my favorite stories to tell about this, because most people have been there many times, is in my first church. Well, they were we have this great rummage sale coming up, and everybody is all, I'm hearing about it from certain people, that this rummage sale is coming and we're going to do this. And then, of course, when the time for the rummage sale comes, there's this big push for for volunteers. And then what do we end up with? We end up with the 4 or 5 or 6 people who've been doing it forever. And you know, they go through all of this work and they're getting angry and they're doing this and they're, you know, a lot of little red hen stuff and all of that kind of stuff. And we get to the end of it and they go, we made $600 over the course of like 10 days of work, you know, or so it seemed. It felt like 10 days of work. And I thought to myself, you know, I'll pay you $800 if we never have to do that again. Because what we had lost was this idea that there was a deeper purpose, that it wasn't just about selling some stuff and making a little bit of money, but it was about building the realm of God. It was about building up the body of Christ, and it was about restoring, reconciling between the people in the church and the church out in the folks in the world, and vice versa. And so we had kind of lost some of that stuff. So my point is to say that this is where the heart of the matter is for the difference. We want to help people who are your volunteers. When we come to church, whether we think about this all the time, you know, sort of consciously or in these words or not, when we come to church, we're coming to church for an experience of God, seeking an experience and deeper relationship with God. And everything we do can be built, or some component of that can be incorporated into the work that we do. And that's where people find meaning. And that's where people get excited and passionate. And that's how you attract. That's why Kirsten said, you know, volunteers bringing in volunteers. Well, volunteers are going to bring in volunteers, one, if they just need more help, but they're going to bring in volunteers a lot more effectively and a lot more enthusiastically if in their work, they're finding meaning, they're finding purpose, which means they're finding God. And so I want to say to you tonight, and there are a lot of details that we can go through, but I want to say to you tonight that in some ways that needs to be part of every group that you do, and every volunteer work that you focus upon, and it needs to be intentionally built in, because it doesn't just happen. You know, I mean, one of the things that we know about, and you all know this, if in a youth group, one of the things that we know about youth group is if you want kids or young people to come, you know, there has to be some reason for them to come, some meaning, or they'll come around for a while and then they'll take off. And the way that you do that is to use the same model of learning that adults learn, by which adults learn, which is, you know, boiled down at an action and reflection model. And so we want to do the things that we're doing. We want to build relationships. We want to incorporate relationship building into it. But we also want to take time at the end to reflect upon that. And I have something, I'll touch on that in just a moment. And Adrian, if you'll let me know if I'm getting too, you know, if I need to shut it down, I will certainly do so. But so that's, I think, the biggest thing that we want to try to do with our groups is build meaning and build purpose. And we really can do that with just about everything that we do. So getting the word out, how do we find volunteers in the church? I'm saying from worst to first. And what I mean by that is by far the worst way is to put it in the newsletter or to put it on a bulletin board somewhere. That doesn't work, very rarely, but that doesn't work. as Kirsten said, your number one evangelists are your people who are excited about it, and they go out and find people to help them because it's meaningful to them. And so that's and you are one of those people. This ostensibly the work that you're doing is meaningful to you. And so it is personal invitation. Whether that personal invitation is from another volunteer or whether it is from you, it's personal invitation that makes the difference. And not even announcements, I mean, announcements are fine, all of these things. It needs to go in the newsletter, all of that kind of stuff. Just don't expect that to find new stuff. People just kind of go find new volunteers. People just kind of go by that. And we do too, when we're flipping through the things, we don't really stop and consider those things often in the ways that we might. So the number one way is to get people out. If you're going to do announcements, or do it in announcements, that's fine, obviously. But my recommendation is that you do it with, and it was something along the lines of, and I'm going to be standing right at the back of the church. And if this sounds at all interesting to you, or next to the coffee pot in wherever we're going to have, if this is at all interesting to you, please come talk to me. Even that is not a personal invitation, but it is closer. And there is a personal element to it. Having a champion, having somebody in your group who is excited about what is going on, and talking to that person and saying, you are the one to help us with this, please help me do some of this recruiting. Because if you have somebody, as I've said, that's engaged and passionate and wants to do it, they're the ones who can talk to people about it the most, them and you. So make it personal. When we're inviting people, Kirsten covered a lot of this very well, but when we're inviting people, we want to make that link. And I'm going to give you an example that may seem silly, but why do we need people to help us work on the landscaping, plant new flowers in the spring, do the whatever it might be? And I know the cathedral employs people to do that more than a lot of churches, but just as an example, is it because people in the United States expect public buildings to look a certain way? Well, yeah, that's part of why we do it. Is it because we want to be a good neighbor to other facilities and buildings and people around us? Yes, that's part of why we do it. But it's also because it says something to the world about who we understand God to be. God is about beauty, and God is about creation, and God is about life, and all of those wonderful things. And when we do this, that's what we are sharing with our community. And we don't talk about that too much when we ask people if they'll come out and help us rake the leaves. But that's the kind of thing that we want to really try to look at and think about. And then we want to, and then in terms of being intentional about that kind of work, are there people we can try to sort of put together? People who might have similar interests, or people who might not. One of the things that's true in our world today is that intergenerational stuff is really important, particularly to millennials and plus or minus the folks around them and in the age groups around them. Very, very important. They didn't grow up, most of them, with their grandparents 3 doors down like it was at one point, and that means a lot. That's something people want. So putting groups together, putting people together, and being intentional about doing that. So raising up that purpose, raising up that the meaning, so that we can, and we don't talk about it all the time, but so that we can, but we do want it to be part of what we're doing. a mistake that we often make is by sort of pretending that all of our small groups, including Bible studies and whatever, as well as all of our sort of servant ministry groups, whether it's, a community meal or this or that, whatever. One of the mistakes we make is by having this sort of assumption that we really do want to just invite, yeah, come on down and see, maybe you'll like it, right? And a lot of times the reality, that's false advertising, because the reality is if somebody comes in on and they want to help with the lunch, there's nothing for them to do. And if there is something for them to do, it's clearly make work. And it's not something that is going to bring any sort of sense of value or purpose or meaning to them. And it's so much easier for us because, gosh, we got to serve in 20 minutes and we got to this and we got to that. It's so much easier for us to just do it ourselves and say, well, maybe you can do this, rather than having a stated and well-developed ethos or culture in every one of our groups, that if volunteers show up that we weren't expecting, or that we were expecting, that we will, even though it's harder for us to do, we will give them meaningful work. We will stand with them and they will do that. We will have a chance to develop relationship with them as we do that, or to help them develop relationships with other people when we put them with other folks. And very closely tied to this is this notion that if people come, then, that we kind of have this expectation that once they've come, they're going to be there forever, right? And that's also a bit of a mistake. We want to have a culture in the church where people know they can sort of drop in and try something without having to, really work to not come back. It needs to be okay. There needs to be a permeable membrane to help people move in and out. And then when they find meaning, they will be back. They will be back. So do we really want members to come and see? Keeping volunteers in small groups together. Kirsten talked about this very well. It's about respecting people. It's about respecting time. I think that's really, really important. A lot of times we invite people, whether it's into a Bible study, small group formation thing, or whether it's, to help in some volunteer work. We invite them and we say it's from this time to this time, and it takes an extra hour. We get to the end of the Bible study and people are talking and we go, well, we're all just talking and having fun. And then the people can't leave. And so, it's really important to be very upfront about respecting everyone's time and say, we're going to start at this time and we're going to end it at this time. And then to stay to that. And that's hard sometimes, but that also is important. Where am I going with this? Yeah, okay, I'm almost done. There. So I've said a little something about finding meaning. There's lots and lots of ways to do this, but the thing that I think the simplest way that I think this can be done, and by the way, I have all of this stuff written out in notes that we're going to email to you after this is over at some point, but is some kind of expectation, some kind of intentionality around spiritual reflection for small groups and volunteers. So let me give you an idea of what I mean. If you're doing volunteer work, you've got a crew of people that are doing a meal or doing a food ministry or something. At least every now and then, right? Pull them aside. Maybe wait until that. Maybe if it's done on a Tuesday, you wait until Sunday and you ask 10 people to give you 10 minutes at the end of the service standing off in one of the corners over there together, and have them just go around the room, go around the circle rather, and answer a very simple question, like, where might you have experienced God? Where did you experience God? Where did you see God? What might God have been up to in your life or in the midst of us in that time? And you use sort of the Lectio Divino sort of process, which means we're not going to talk about this a lot. This is about naming and sharing. It's not about exploring and opening up. And so it's just gonna be, you say, we just want a sentence or two from everybody who's willing to share, a sentence or two that says something about where you experienced God in this, last Tuesday when we were together. And if you do this, every 3 or 4 times, 10 minutes, something like that. And I know a lot of people often say, well, you don't know us when we'll go on for 2 hours with that. And I want to say, yeah, don't, right? Because again, we're back to the issue of letting people have expectations that you honor their time and that they're, and so you just go around the room and share it. And then you say, thank you, Lord. And you take off and do the rest of the morning. Go get your coffee and donuts, whatever it is. Some regular process of spiritual reflection where we're trying to identify for one another and for ourselves where we have seen and experienced God. Because remember, that's where I started. Everything we do, what people are doing, including your long-term members, when they're coming into church, is looking for, hoping for, praying for an experience of God. Very last thing, and I have some rules about how to do that. Very last thing is sort of when to let go. And I have a couple of things to say about that. One is, one of the things we do in the church is we tend to look for the ultimate solution to something. So we want to find a small group formation process that once we get it going, it's going to last every Wednesday night from 7:30 to 9 for the next 100 years, and a lot of times our expectations are just wrong about that. Again, Kirsten touched on this as well. You don't, long-term commitments and things are just it's not something that people are as interested in. And there's at least 2 reasons for that. One is they don't know and they just don't want to do that. The other is it's just, we get bored. We want to try something new. We want to do something. So plan things to the extent that you can. Plan things to change, plan things to have beginnings and endings, and sort of bring them over. You bring in, that allows you to be fresh. It allows you to, incorporate. So I call that sort of planned obsolescence, and think about planned obsolescence as you organize your group. And I'll just say that the last thing I'll say here is that when groups are ready to go, let them go. And when you let them go, celebrate them. Don't just let it go, or oh well, we sort of petered away and petered off, and then there wasn't anybody coming anymore, so we can't do it. Celebrate them. Call the people back who had been in with it before, just to give it a toast and a prayer and maybe a spiritual reflection. Imagine that, on what might have happened. There's a lot more in all of this, but I'll just stop right there, and let Adrian take us from here.
Thank you, Brad. Yeah, I have one sort of bookending thought that came to me as I was listening, particularly to the way you opened, Brad, talking to us about that creation story. When I hear relationships highlighted as the most important aspect of our work, especially those relationships in the creation story, I hear in it that what's important are our relationships with each other, the dignity of every human being, our relationships with creation, the care of animal and earth, and the relationships, our relationship with God, care and connection, and spiritual awareness. And so it makes me think that those are three relationships that we can be conscious of in all of our small group work, which might mean that, you know, if you're the knitting group, you're thinking about, you know, what sustainable equipment are we using as we knit? Is there some way we can care for creation as we do this? And if you're the creation care group, you're thinking, how do we respect the dignity of every human being as we're trying to invite them into creation care? So, you know, to think about those three relationships as integral to all the work that we do. Which ones are we good at highlighting? Which ones aren't we good yet?
Yeah. Which also allows you ways to sort of move through things. Focus on one for a little while, focus on another for a little while, you know, and you can keep that, all of those things, you know, a little fresher.
Thank you. Well, we got such wonderful practical information from two different fronts, and I want to make space for the next 15 minutes to invite questions from all of you. So what are some questions you feel like you still need some clarity on or some answers to as you're considering your own ministry group and the volunteer work that you're doing, that you might have for Kirsten or for Brad? And you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Adrienne, this is Audrey, and I'd like to ask Kirsten for some advice on leadership transitioning.
Good question. Are you talking about leadership transition like within your ministry group?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that we have like recommended to some of our agencies that we work with, or even some of our, when we have leadership volunteers, is if at all possible to kind of have like a leader, a volunteer, another volunteer in leadership, or kind of someone that you're mentoring along the way. So then, so it depends though, right? What kind of time frame you're looking at to see then if you could then like kind of bringing them along, providing, and then at some point almost be like a co-leader with them, right? Where you might be delegating more and more of responsibilities, and then hopefully be able to turn that over to that person. I'm assuming you are asking that because you are looking to transition out of your current role. Am I correct in that assumption?
Correct.
Okay. So I think, you know, the key is finding someone that I think one has the desire and the passion, right, to want to have that leadership role. And I think for many volunteers, they might not feel qualified at the beginning, right? Like, oh, I can't do that. But it's almost like if you could bring them along, mentor them, or even, you know, if you're starting to see qualities in them that you feel are leadership material, to kind of bring them on board with you and help them. That would probably be my advice in that situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for our speakers?
I'm thinking of the tension between two aspects of growing a small group that Brad and Kirsten talked about. First of all, I try to do this in chat, but I'm not sure it worked. So chat and me don't get along, but at least for, and I think for secular groups, Brad, what you were saying that, and I was skeptical at first, but I think you're right. The practicalities of getting the job done, at least in, it could be in secular groups too, are secondary to the transformative background that happens to the people that are interacting with other people and maybe are interacting with a greater good. And in church, we can talk about God or the divine, but in a secular situation, it could be the greater good for society in some situation. And I think that I thought, those remarks should be boiled down into some jazzy way to ask people to become volunteers. Before you put the particular ask out, remind them of the personal benefits that they're going to receive in terms of growing. But then also, and you mentioned this, and I think Kirsten did too, not every volunteer opportunity is for every person that's listening. And I think maybe in church, we sometimes inadvertently turn people off when we say, come, here's an opportunity, and we just kind of throw the door open. And I think maybe we turn people off because they think, well, if it's that easy to get in, it's like Groucho Marx.
Right.
I wouldn't want to join any club that let me in the front door. So I think, how do we work out that tension? Tell people what, not just getting the job done, but the great growth that they could achieve if they do this volunteer work in the right spirit, but also they need to pick what they, what's actually going to work for them.
Yeah.
I should never have gone into teaching. I'm sorry that took so long.
I'm going to respond to a part of it, and I know Kirsten probably has something she might want to offer as well. I think, if it's a budget audit committee, then that's requires a certain kind of person, and that's not quite the same as somebody who's going to help you rake the leaves, or is able to or interested in doing that, and so that's not obviously something for everyone. And so there are differences that way, and I think being clear and upfront about those things, as you just said, is very helpful. I would also say that when you said talking about those things, snappy and jazzy sort of ways, I think that's important, because it's less important to talk. It is important to name it up front, but in my opinion, it's much less important to name it at great length or whatever up front, and much more important to reflect on experiences people have already had, so that then they can put those things together. That's one of the things about having it happen in a circle like that. If you ask a question, where did you experience God, or where might you have experienced the divine or something in last Tuesday, and I'm thinking like, not at all, right? But Scott may say, well, this happened. And somebody else might say, well, maybe when this happened. And part of what's happening to me is I'm thinking, well, maybe that's true. Maybe, that happened to me too. Or maybe the next time I'm in that group or doing something like that, something happens to me like what happened to, like what Scott named, and then I'm able to see God at work in that moment, because Scott has shared with me his experience, and I've learned from that, and now I have something that, one of the other things that happens in all of that is that if we do those things regularly, we sort of teach people what I think is one of the most important things the church has to offer, which is to keep their eyes open for God. How do we learn to look for God and not just have it all go right past us and not see it? So when we follow those some kind of pattern, and I don't mean constantly, but some kind of pattern of that action and reflection model, we learn. And so that I would just say that it is in the offering, but it's even more in the doing and reflecting upon what it is that we've done.
We probably have time for maybe one more question, if anyone has that.
We
Well,
have
then-
said it all.
No, Brad, I have a question, Audrey again. Can you give a good example of when a ministry had completed its work and closed?
Sure, yeah. Well, I would say one of them is that rummage sale, right? When it really is clear that we're fighting to make things work, then let it go, let it go. It may have another season. You can bring it back another time. That's an example. I think youth groups, and I know this is painful, but youth groups sometimes have a beginning and an end, and then they come back again a little bit later, in different ways with different people. Those kinds of things, and I've had that happen in my ministry, for sure. And so I would say that would be one. And another is just, it's not always terrible to stop when you're at the top. Okay, when things are going really well and you're making a difference, and I don't mean just pull the rug out. I'm not talking about if you're feeding people and that kind of thing. You don't just, well, okay, sorry, we're not going to come back anymore necessarily. But then again, if you're going to offer something different or offer something, to the same people in the same way at the same time, but changing things up just for this, just to keep things fresh. We let things go sometimes, a long time. And they're, maybe they could have gone before. I'm not sure that answers your question, but.
Well, Brad, I do have one thought just on that. Well, two really. The youth group comment, which I think is true for Trinity right now. So I appreciate the naming of that. It is a difficult thing, but I think also what I hear underneath that is if there's a ministry group that's meeting where relationships are the primary focus.
Yep.
If the relationships aren't gelling for whatever reason, then that might be a time when a group has to let go, until new people are ready to form and shape and build around whatever that cause was, if relationship building is a huge piece of it. So
I might add too, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I might add too, just on that level, if you're doing a small group and people are supposed to be able to come into it, and you see people are coming in and they're not staying, then it's probably because you're not welcoming them, not in any meaningful way. And that may be a time to close a group off, because that is part of the ethos of the church, is that we are open and we are inviting and we are diverse and we are welcoming and all of those things. I'm sorry, Adrian, I cut you off.
No, that's all right. And I don't remember what my next thought was, but that's okay, because we're just about at time. But I did want to highlight, Fran had asked a question in the chat and just kind of invited some reflection on how we used to do a ministry fair, and Messy Church experience with a lot of activities to inviting folks to small group ministries. And I'm really encouraged by this conversation because Cathedral Council, who put on this forum, had done some reflection together on those experiences. And really, we found that at the ministry fair and Messy Church, we were getting a lot of the same people who do volunteer work were volunteering for all, it might be a different group they volunteered for, but it was all the same people re-volunteering. And so, hearing about relationships building and that personal ask, and hearing about the very practical tools and ways we can set up administratively and internally in our small groups to make sure that we have something to offer them, something to really connect them to in a meaningful way. Those are such helpful details that I think we can put into a vision that Council has organized, which is for 2022. We intend to, one, pray for every small group in our church, which we do already, but not necessarily with any other focus attached to it. So on the Sundays where we're specifically praying for them in our liturgy, we're also going to have a table out in the piazza where that small group can personally invite people to engage with their ministry. And then on that table will also be content for all of the small groups. So if that ministry, you're meeting someone, you're chatting with them, you're interested in volunteering, but that's not the right ministry, you can look and see who the contact people are for all the other ministries. And so that feels like the closest way we can do an advertising in any kind of group setting at Trinity, based on some of the content and feedback we've gotten from both you, Kirsten, and Brad. So I am excited to hear that strategy might work for this new year.
Yeah.
So I appreciate those thoughts, and if you have any reflections on that too, I'd love to hear.
I would just say that in that ministry fair, think about how does the table not just be a table, but be a place where people talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that super quick? We used to have, one of my churches, we used to hand out water bottles at a fair, and we would just hand out water bottles and people would just take them and keep going. And finally somebody said, what if we paint the children's faces for free? And every little child wants a daisy on their face or a dinosaur. And so the kids would come and sit down. It cost like nothing to do. We would paint their face. Meanwhile, what are the parents doing? They're standing waiting for the kid. And now you offer them a cup of coffee and now you have a conversation with them, right? Mm-hmm. It's being intentional in that kind of way. And how might that kind of thought process affect a ministry fair?
Yes, thank you. Well, I thank all of you again for taking the time out to be here tonight. That tells me something of your commitment both to your faith and to the ministries that you represent. So with deep appreciation, thank you all for being here, especially to our speakers and for the time and effort you put in to share of your wisdom and experience. This will be online, so if there are folks you think that would really benefit from this, look for it this next week through our media channels, and you can forward it to a friend. Thank you all so much for being a part. Have a great evening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, all.
Thank you, everybody. It was nice seeing you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.